On live.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, and thank you for your patience. As we know, many of you have had questions concerning your upcoming interim performance report. So we hope today's session will address those questions and concerns. I am Carlette Kaiser-Pegram from the Office of Safe and Supportive Students at the U.S. Department of Education, and I will be presenting today along with Jennifer Freeman from the PBIS Technical Assistance Center. We will have an opportunity for you to ask questions via the chat box at the end of the session. However, if you find that you have questions along the way, you can certainly post them in the chat box, as my colleague Nicole White is online, and she will do her best to respond to any questions that might come up during the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started, because I want to be mindful of your time, and I want to make sure that we have ample time to answer any of your questions. So in terms of today's session, we're going to talk very briefly about the reporting purpose and the due dates. We'll spend a little bit more time on the reporting form, as that's the form you will use to submit your interim performance report, the ED 524B. We'll do a recap of the GPRA. Make sure that you are aware that ED does have some COVID-19 resources that you're certainly able to log on to and see. And as I mentioned, we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions via the chat box. So as you know, as a discretionary grantee at the Department of Education, you are required to submit performance reports that show substantial progress, or that you're demonstrating substantial progress towards meeting your goals and objectives. And those reports are designed to capture both your financial and your performance data. These reports are very important. They're critical for the department because they help us to determine where you are with your project, if you are progressing substantially, and in some cases, it helps us to make a determination regarding funding. So very important reports. For the 2019 cohort of the School Climate Transformation Local Education Agency grantees, you guys will have both interim reports and annual reports every year. And then at the conclusion, the final year of your grant, which is year 5 for most of you, you will have a final performance report. So you have an interim performance report that's going to be due annually. You have an annual performance report, an APR, that will be due annually, with the exception of the last year, and that will be your final performance report. So we're here today to talk about the very first report that's due, which is your interim performance report. So your interim performance report will be due June 15th. For those of you who were in DC at the new grantee meeting, you know that we had a different date. However, because we've had some interruptions, we have pushed the date out to June 15th. So your interim performance report will be due June 15th. Right now, the annual performance report is still due October 15th. If that changes, we will definitely let you know. We don't have dates yet for the other IPRs and APRs. We will let you know as soon as those are determined. But for right now, the interim performance report, which is the one that we're most concerned with at this point, is due on June 15th, on or before June 15th. So the reporting form that you're going to use for this report is the ED 524B form. And so you've probably heard me say before that this form is not to be confused with the ED 524. So if you're doing a search and you find the ED 524, it's a very different form than the ED 524B. Not sure why they are so similarly named, but they are. But the ED 524B is your official performance reporting form, and it is the same form that you will use for each of those reports that I mentioned previously, the interim performance report, the annual performance report, and the final performance report. So if you've not seen that, you can access that at any time on the Department of Education's website, as well as the instructions for that form. So there are 5 distinct sections of the ED 524B form. You have the cover sheet, the executive summary, sections A, B, and C. So those sections, those 5 areas make up the report in its entirety, and you are required to complete each of the sections. So we'll talk a little bit about what is expected from each section. So this is what the cover sheet looks like. This is what the ED 524 cover sheet looks like. Pretty standard. You've probably seen it before. And it's a standard form for the Department of Education. So even if you have other discretionary grants in the department, you've probably seen this reporting form before if you are in fact the person who's responsible for the performance reports for other grants in ed. So again,
I need to interrupt just briefly. We're not getting your screen share coming through. Can you reshare your content?
Certainly. Let's see. All right, are you able to see it now?
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
All right, and someone said that they had a hard time hearing me. Are you able to hear me? If someone could put in the chat box if they can hear me, that would be great.
We're hearing you good on this end.
Okay, and I apologize, I can't see the chat right now, but if you can hear me, if people can type in, yes, you can hear me, or no, you cannot. Okay, I think that might mean I'm okay, yes. All right. So we'll continue. So again, this is the ED 524B reporting form cover sheet. Pretty standard. This is what it looks like. Couple of tips for reporting. Based on the email that you received from me earlier, you know that this reporting period is from October 1st through February 29th. So you should not alter these dates. You should not alter these dates. So these are standard dates for your entire cohort. And so we are looking for this report to cover that period of time. Once you submit your annual performance report, it will in fact capture the remainder of this budget year. But for this interim report, you are looking at October 1st, 2019 through February 29th, 2020. So for the space of number 7, those are the dates that you're going to use, and you'll all have the same date. Now, it doesn't mean that you haven't done work after February 29th. It just means that that's the period that you're reporting on for this particular report, okay? Make sure that you consult with your business office for budget information or any sections that require responses related to your budget if you don't know your exact numbers. Another tip is, of course, to make sure that you provide proof of your current negotiated indirect cost rate. If your agency is in fact claiming indirect costs, you can just attach that. Another question that you may have is on number 8. And number 8 has 3 areas, 8A, 8B, and 8C. For this report, you need only complete 8B because you're not at the point to complete 8C yet, and you don't have a previous budget since this is your first year, so you can't complete 8A, okay? Also, for this report, you may leave section 11 blank if you have no information to put there. So just a couple of tips in terms of the cover sheet. Other than that, it's pretty standard. There are also instructions on this 524B form at the Department of Ed's website. And of course, if you have questions or you get stuck, you can reach out to your federal project officer. But those are a couple of things that we know typically come up at this report. Okay, The second section is the executive summary section. Now, the executive summary is a space where you will provide a 1 to 2 page general summary of your project. So this is where you're going to talk generally about what it is you're doing and what it is you've done. You may use this section to highlight any progress towards your project goals, and the extent to which you expected outcomes and performance measures, your outcome and performance measures were achieved. Now, again, we recognize that, we've all had some disruption, and you may not be where you anticipated you would be, and that's fine. The executive summary just gives you a space to give us a general summary of your project, where you are, what you're doing. And of course, if there are goals and objectives that are not being met, you can include that information here. You'll be a little bit more specific later in the report, but that's the purpose of the executive summary. So following that, you'll see section A. This is the third section of the 524B performance reporting form. Section A, the form itself looks like this, which you see on the screen. And section A is your project status. This is the section you will use to report both your program measures and your GPRA measures. Now, again, we recognize that based on what's currently going on, many of you may not have this information completed to the point where you thought you would at this time, and that's okay. But this section is still here. It is still required you are still required to address in some way. So if you have no data, if you have minimal data, you'll be able to discuss that and reference that in the explanation of progress section. So the project status page has an upper section, which is your chart, where you will include the measures, whether they are program or GPRA, and you'll indicate which one. And the explanation of progress, which is below the chart, is a space that allows you to type in narrative to explain your data. Okay, again, we don't want you to, feel frustrated or anxious about not being where you thought you would be. We are just expecting that you report wherever you are and what you have in this section. I will mention to you that GPRA measures are established. The language is what it is. And so don't change the language. And I only mention that because sometimes grantees tend to rewrite the GPRA measures. I'm not sure why, but we see that a lot in reports. So those GPRA measures are established and the language is what it is. Your program measures will vary, but your GPRA measures are already established. The language is what it is, and they are the same for all of you. Then you have section B, which kind of looks like this. You can use as many sections as you need. You can include as many pages as you need. I'm sorry, not sections, but pages that you need to complete section B of the report. Section B is essentially your budget. Now remember, we are talking about the budget as it relates to this reporting period, which is again, October 1st, 2019 through February 29th, 2020. And so there's some things that we want you to particularly address in this budget. We want to make sure that you talk about the funds that you've expended through 2/29/20. And so when I say funds that you've expended, I mean the funds that you've actually drawn out of your G5 account, that they are actually gone. I could go to G5 and I could see that the funds have been drawn out. So we want you to talk about what have you spent and where have you spent it. You all have budgets that were approved, and so you're spending according to your budgets, but we want to know how much you've spent through February 29 and in what areas, okay? We also want to know what you've obligated for the rest of this budget period, which ends 9/30/20. Now, when I say funds that you've obligated, I mean funds that you've not yet drawn out of the system. You've not yet pulled them from G5, but they're already obligated to a particular purpose that you know you're going to need. So in other words, let's say you have some salary expenses. You've not pulled those out of G5 yet because we still have time remaining in this budget period because it doesn't end until September 30th. But you know you're paying those salaries out on a regular basis, and so you already know that you have money that's going to be obligated to those salaries. Okay. We want to know any anticipated carryover amounts. So carryover then would be those funds that are remaining after you've already accounted for the obligated funds. What's remaining? What do you anticipate you will have left over? And how are you proposing to use those funds if you are requesting, in fact, to carry them over? So we kind of have three sets of monies here, if you will. We have what you've already spent. We have what's obligated because you already know you will spend it because it's obligated to a particular expenditure or task or activity. And then we have what will be left over that you have not accounted for. We need to know what that is if you in fact want to carry it over. And if you do want to carry over, what is the proposed use? Also in this report under Section B, we want to know if you plan to repurpose any of the carryover balances to support or expand remote learning or other appropriate costs related to any disruption or causes from COVID-19. Okay, so Section B is a narrative section, and we want to make sure you're covering all of that in the narrative. Now, in addition to that narrative, not in lieu of, but in addition to the narrative, you may also use the Excel spreadsheet template that we provided to assist in providing details to your expenditures. So the Excel spreadsheet is just the template that we provided that you may use because it just gives a picture of everything that you're going to discuss in the narrative section of this report. So again, Section B is your budget. It's all about your spending, what you've spent, how, why, etc. And again, you can attach that Excel spreadsheet to accompany the narrative that you're going to provide in Section B. And that's the spreadsheet that you all have at this point. So again, you can see that it clearly articulates the most recently approved budget amounts, what you've actually drawn down in G5, what you have obligated through September 30th, and then what's left, obviously, is the anticipated carryover. If you choose to use this spreadsheet, that is fine. You can add as many subcategories as you need to, if you need to. Okay, if you feel like you need to add some rows under each of the primary categories because you want to further explain or demonstrate what it is specifically you're talking about, you may do so. Or you can just do the totals for the budget category on this spreadsheet. But again, this is to accompany the narrative. This does not replace the narrative. And then there's Section C. Section C for many reports will be optional. Section C for this report is not optional. You need to complete it, and you need to complete it with some very specific things because they're particular to this report. So I want to make sure that everybody understands that the department is looking for you to address these items. Number one, we want you to provide a brief description of how the pandemic has affected or disrupted your program activities, if applicable. So if you've had any of your activities disrupted, which I'm going to assume that most of you have to some degree, it will vary from program to program, but we want a brief description of how it has affected or disrupted your program services. We also want you to identify activities that were not implemented because of COVID-19. So any activities that you had planned that were not implemented and directly because of COVID-19. We want you to identify any activities that were implemented during October 1 through February 29th. So again, that reporting period. What did you plan to do that you actually did? Okay. Then, of course, we want you to identify any activities that you were unable to implement, but you still anticipate implementing during this budget year, September 30th. So that means that there may have been some things that were disrupted that you had to postpone, but you know you're still going to get them in, which is a little bit different than activities that you had to completely cancel. So were there activities that may be off of your original timeline, but you still anticipate completing them by September 30th? Okay. We want you to describe your plan to resume or restore your grant activities, including a timeline after the official reopening of schools. So what is your plan for continuing the grant activities that you proposed? And what is the timeline for such? Number 6, we want you, if applicable, to provide a description of your intention to repurpose any of the initial activities to support any distance learning. So I know that I've gotten some emails from you individually, and some of you have already given us some information in terms of your plans to shift some things to support distance learning. But we want to hear from everyone. If you have plans to repurpose, to shift, to rearrange some of your activities to support distance learning after the official reopening of your schools, we want you to provide a description of that. We also want you to describe what's going on with your GPRA measures and your ability to make progress in meeting those measures. And keep in mind, there are 6 for your program. There are 6 for the 2019 cohort of school climate transformation grantees. So we want you to talk about your progress in meeting those. Again, we definitely understand the disruption. We know that you are perhaps not where you want to be, but tell us where you are. Okay. By the same token, tell us where you are in your own program measures. Again, the 6 GPRA measures are the same for all of you, but your program measures are unique to your individual project. So tell us where you are in meeting those. Also talk about your progress in meeting your identified goals and objectives during this reporting period. And again, keep in mind, all of this information for the report is during this reporting period when you're talking about where you've made progress towards your goals and objectives. Okay. And then finally, which is also very, very important, we need written confirmation specifically stating that you can continue with the activities, even if you have to make alterations and adjustments to your timelines, and that you do wish to continue receiving funding for a subsequent year. So make sure you do let us know specifically that you wish to receive a continuation award and that you are in a position that you believe you can carry out the grant. So again, Section C needs to cover all of those areas. All of those areas we expect to see in Section C. There are some other things that you can address in Section C, okay? These are optional at this point. They're optional. These are. And these have to do with the program requirements. As you know, there are 6 program requirements related to school climate transformation. And so if you've made some progress and in these 6 areas, you can certainly address it here in Section C. Okay, Jennifer's going to do a recap of the GPRA for you guys. For some of you, it will be a recap, and for some of you, it'll be brand new information.
All right. I'm sharing. All right, so as Carlette said, this information is the same information that we shared with folks that were with us at the project directors meeting in DC. So if you were there with us, this is the same information, just a quick reminder. If you were not with us, if you're a new project officer, this will be the first time you've seen this. Just a quick reminder that the GPRA measures are required by law, and that they provide really important information. And so they allow us to aggregate the results of your grant across programs, across sites. They allow us to make judgments and decisions about the type and quality of technical assistance that we provide to sites. And they allow us to show progress from year to year and to advocate for future funding in similar programs. And so the GPRA measures, as Carlette said, are standard. You're not to change the language in those measures. We, as a PBIS center, are providing a couple of tips to help clarify what these measures mean and to standardize the reporting across sites. So these are tips. Again, as Carlette said, you may or may not be able to report on some of these measures this year at this time, and that's okay. But if you are able to report on it, these are some ideas for how to do so clearly. So for GPRA measure number 1, it is the number of training and technical assistance events that are provided to your LEA and schools during this time. Please define for us what a training and a TA event is in your district. So tell us what you're counting with a really clear description. Consider providing a summary of participant evaluations to let us know how participants experience those events, and let us know which schools were trained in each area during that year. Likely you're providing lots of different professional development. Let us know which schools are participating in each one of those during that performance period. For GPRA measure number 2, we're asking that you report the number and percentage of schools annually that report improved school climate based on the results of the ED School Climate Survey or a similar tool. When reporting this measure, please clearly describe which tool you're using and let us know what it is and provide the details about that particular measure. Please consider providing both an overall score as well as subscales. Depending on the scale that you're using, you may get just an overall score. You may also get subscale scores. All of those are useful information when we're thinking about aggregating these across measures, or across sites rather. And then again, please provide a list of schools that were trained in this particular area. So if you provided training related to school climate, let us know which schools were part of that. For GPRA measure number 3, they're asking for the number and percent of schools that are implementing a multi-tiered system of support. Let us know when you're reporting this, which schools are implementing at least tier 1. That meets the criteria for this measure. So when it says are implementing a multi-tiered system, you know that includes multiple tiers and you can measure fidelity at multiple tiers. For this measure, we are saying that a school that is implementing 2 criterion for tier 1 should be counted in GPRA measure number 3. Provide the implementation fidelity scores and assessments though across tiers. So you're going to say, yes, the school is implementing tier 1 at criterion, they are implementing, but also let us know what the fidelity score looks like at tier 2 or tier 3. You can consider summarizing this in a table with the annual scores and assessment results across tiers for each school so that we're able to kind of really dig into that. For number 4, the number and percentage of schools annually that are implementing opioid abuse prevention and mitigation strategies. Let us know what the program is, what the specific programs or strategies are that you're using with some detail, and provide information about the implementation fidelity of that core program. As you know, fidelity should be directly linked to outcomes, and if it's we're not seeing outcomes yet, and it's because you haven't yet been able to get it fully in place, that fidelity information would let us know that. And for GPRA measure number 5, the number and percent of schools that report an annual decrease in suspensions and expulsions related to the possession or use of alcohol. Again, consider providing a table that gives us annual numbers of suspensions and expulsions related to alcohol use for each school, and give us overall enrollment numbers for each school. That helps facilitate comparisons across schools rather than just the raw number of suspensions or expulsions. And for number 6, same thing, but this time suspensions and expulsions related to the possession or use of other drugs. Consider that same table and consider letting us know what your overall enrollment is so that we can compare that across schools and across sites more easily. Again, those are tips and ideas for helping to clarify your reporting of those GPRA measures. If you're not able to report on all of those at this time, that is okay. You will work with your project officer and we'll make a plan for reporting those when you are able to do so later on. We just wanted to highlight that the Department of Ed does have some additional resources for you all on COVID-19. You can access those by going to the Department of Ed website and clicking on the coronavirus information feature as shown here in this slide. And at this point, Carlette and Nicole are going to address your questions via the chat box.
So I'm trying to scroll quickly through the chat box to see if there are some questions that we've not addressed. I see a lot of questions about getting a copy of this, the slides. Yes, we will send a copy of the PowerPoint slides as well as resend some other resources that we sent out to you, some information that the department wants to make sure that you've seen, particularly around some Q&A that you had before. We will resend that. And as Jennifer responded, I think in the chat box, we'll also post the information on the PBIS TA Center's website. So once that's up and it's available to you, you will receive an email letting you know that the slides are available, in addition to the information that we'll send you. Someone asked about using G5 to submit this report. I think some of the information that I sent out to you earlier indicated that we will not use G5 for this interim report. You will complete your interim report and submit it to your program officer as well as the SCTG mailbox. I'll make sure that I include that again in the information that I send to you following this webinar. So again, you can pull the forms from the Department of Education website and complete the ED 524B forms, as well as attach anything that you need to attach, like your indirect cost agreement, if that is your case, and any other attachments, and you'll send it directly to your federal officer, as well as the mailbox. So we'll make sure I'll resend that information so that everybody has it. Trying to see if there are other questions. I'm checking.
Carlette, I've been moving content-specific questions into the published section of the Q&A so that it's a little easier to scroll through.
Okay, let's see. Someone asked a question about should you or will you have to type in 999 for the targeted spaces, and if you don't have any. Generally, that's what happens when you have to submit via G5, because the reporting form looks a little bit different when you're doing it in the system, and there's some spaces that will not allow you to move forward if you don't put something in there. And what we found is 999 will work if you don't have any data to put in the target spaces, and G5 doesn't allow you to move forward. That's not going to be a concern for this particular report, because again, you're not going to submit it via G5. In fact, it's not even in the system. So if you go into G5 now and you look for an interim performance report for year 1, you're not even going to find one. So we've not even put it in G5, because just to make sure that there's no confusion, these reports will not be submitted via G5. So you should not have that issue of having to put something in the target space. That's generally an issue when you are submitting via the system. So that should not be an issue. Someone said there are 6 components of GPRA. Do we report 6 different measures or one GPRA measure with all 6? No, you have 6 different measures. You have 6 different GPRA measures, and so you will report on all 6 of them. And then you have a number of individual program measures, which you will also report. And so the program measures, the number of program measures will vary because you guys have developed those based on your individual projects that you've designed. So some of you have fewer than others, but you all have them. But there are 6 GPRA measures, and yes, you will report on all 6. There's only one of you, only one grantee did not opt to have any activities related to opioids. And so that would be the only grantee who does not have any information in that particular, under that particular GPRA measure. But the rest of you will report on all 6. Someone mentioned, is this the time to move funds to cover other expenses? Yes. So section B, your budget section, is where you're going to discuss any anticipated or proposed movement or shifts in funds. Some of you have already reached out to either me or Nicole to talk about shifting some funds for particular reasons, and we've addressed those individually as you've reached out to us. But if you find now that there are also some places and spaces where you need to shift some funding, section B is where you want to articulate that. If we have questions, we'll reach out to you, but that's where all of that should go. Someone mentioned, could you clarify using funds to support remote learning? Some of you, because of the disruption, have not been able to do some of the activities that you anticipated doing. Some of you have been able to still do some of the activities. Some of you have been able to do some iteration or some modified version of the activities because you've been able to implement some type of distance learning activity. And so that's what we mean about shifting to perhaps do some distance learning activities that you had not anticipated before, but will still work to reach your goals and objectives that you've planned. And so if you've made those shifts, or if you're proposing those shifts, or if you have some activities that you can still cover you can still cover via some type of remote or distance learning, that's what we mean by that. Someone said, if we've addressed these questions previously, do we need to repeat the information here in section C? If you've addressed those 10 items that we mentioned on the slide somewhere else in your report, you don't particularly have to repeat them in section C, but it needs to be clear. So when we review these reports, we are going to be looking that you've addressed all 10 of those pieces. And so if you clearly, have addressed number 3 in a different section, that's fine. You just need to make sure that it's very clear to us. So section C is just the neatest space to capture it in, just because of the way the report is designed. But if you choose to address it somewhere else, just make sure we know that and we know where to look for it. Someone said COVID-19 did not severely impact them prior to 2/29, but it has impacted since that date, and that is fine. You can articulate that in your abstract or in the applicable sections under section C for those questions. We do want to make sure that you are distinguishing, however, what disruptions did occur prior to 2/29, because that's the reporting date and that's the generic reporting date for all of you. So if you've had some interruptions that were prior to 2/29, make sure that you're letting us know what those are. If you've had some after 2/29 and that we need to be aware of, certainly include those in your report, but just make sure that you give us a date so we'll know kind of when the impact happened. Someone said, is there a formal form to fill out to answer questions related to GPRA measures? No, there's no formal form. If you have GPRA questions, just reach out to your federal project officer. If you find that you have some concerns with GPRA, the GPRA measures, or you need some additional information or assistance in understanding what those measures are, you don't need to fill out a particular form. Can you include the EDS CLS data if it was aggregated after the 29th? Sure, you can mention it. Just make sure that you let us know, because what this report is designed to be streamlined, just because we know the disruption it's caused to many, if not all of you. So we definitely want to know what happened during that reporting period. However, if you feel like there's important information that you want to share with us that happened after February 29th, you're certainly not restricted from putting it in the report. You would just need to let us know and make sure that, you know, we understand the timing of these things. So this report is designed to capture what kind of went on and what's going on, or what happened with you between that period of time. But we don't want you to feel restricted if you've done something in addition that you feel like is important for us to know and understand. Just make sure we know that that's what you're talking about. So someone said, if we are a consortium of school districts, do we report district level data, or do we have a report, or do we have to report each school in each district? So we still want to know what was going on with each school. And I think Jennifer addressed that some in her report. Jennifer, do you want to hop in and assist?
Sure. I think for the GPRA measure, it asks that you aggregate for your entire LEA, but in the table that we would suggest you include along with that, you would provide the information for each individual school that would help us interpret the aggregate that you're reporting for your GPRA measure.
And I apologize if I missed some of the questions. You're certainly welcome to email me or Nicole afterwards. Let's see. Someone said, just to be clear, we're sending the document directly to you and not G5. Correct. Your document goes to your federal program officer, so you're either assigned to Nicole or me. So you need to send it directly to your federal program officer, as well as the school climate transformation mailbox. Okay, so as well as the school climate transformation mailbox. Someone said, in what section should we include the external evaluators quarterly report? So in terms of your evaluators, you have required different things from your evaluators. And so some of you are not even using external evaluators. You're doing your own internal evaluation, which is fine. Some of you are using external evaluators, and what you're requiring them to submit to you will vary. And so any information that you feel like is relevant, that you want to include, you can certainly include it in section C if it doesn't belong somewhere else. So if your external evaluator is specifically giving you information that's related to your GPRA data, then obviously you're going to infuse that in section A, because that's where you are talking about your GPRA and your program evaluation, your program data. If there's other evaluation information that's being collected from your external evaluator, and you feel like it's important for us to know, you can put it in section C if in fact it doesn't necessarily relate to program measures or GPRA measures. So it really just depends on what it is. I wouldn't know necessarily what your evaluator is submitting in your quarterly report, because that would be something that you've determined that you wanted your evaluator to submit to you, and it's not the same across the board. Someone mentioned with the reporting period being from October 1st through February 29th, the majority of the GPRA measures being annual measures, is it safe to assume that the reporting around the GPRA measures in the IPR will be more about process? And in some cases, yes. In most cases, yes, that is fine. You're going to explain it under your explanation of progress, but you don't want to leave that out. So we understand that you won't necessarily be where you thought you would be, and we don't expect that you have final data at this point. The IPR is not intended to collect final GPRA measures, even in a normal circumstance. So we're not looking for final GPRA measures in this report, but we're looking for where you are in terms of your progress. Again, I think someone's asking for the link, and the link to, I'm assuming the PBIS webpage. Jennifer sent that out. pbis.org/SCTG is where you're going to find the resources after the session, including this PowerPoint. And we're also going to send out an email. Okay. Again, I'm seeing quite a few questions about what if the data is not available. GPRA data is not available. That's fine. You're just going to report on what you have, if anything, and then your explanation of progress, and probably somewhere else in your report where you talk about the disruptions, we'll know why. So we don't want you to feel like you're going to be penalized if you don't have your GPRA data, because we anticipate that most, if not all of you, will have had some type of interruption. So we know that you're not going to have it. And again, the IPR is not designed to capture final data anyway. You'll just need to explain what you have, if anything, and any disruption. Where can you find the ED 524B form? It's on the Department of Education's website under forms. I'll also send a link out, and you'll find a link in this PowerPoint presentation. Someone said, will you need to mail the report? No, please do not mail the report. We are not in the offices, and so we won't get it anyway. You can just email it. If you are unsure whether your report reaches us, just reach out or ask us to reply. We'll reply and let you know we have it. We'll reply anyway if we don't have it, because we'll be looking for it. So do not mail it. We are not in the offices, so we will not get them. Email it. Someone asked about making personnel changes in the budget. Does it go in section B? Yes. Anything related to budget changes, budget amendments, budget requests, movement, yes, section B. All of that's in the budget section. Someone asked about future funding for SCTG. Unfortunately, we don't know. I mean, Congress appropriates funds to the program annually. And so we kind of know when there's a budget and what type of funding we'll get for our programs. So unfortunately, we can't say definitively that, funds are in place for the next 4 years. We can only go from 1 year at a time once we have a budget in place. Someone asked about changing project directors. Yes, reach out to your federal project officer about any project director changes, so we can make the change. It is important if you have a new project director that you let us know, because most of what we send out goes out via G5. And so if we don't have the correct people in G5, we will not know that you're not getting information. So definitely, if you anticipate changing the project directors, we need to know that. Otherwise, your organization may miss out on some important information, because again, we send out most of our correspondence via G5. And so it'll go to that person listed in G5 as the contact. So if it's not correct, we need to know that. Again, I've scrolled pretty quickly. I hope that I've gotten most of these questions. But again, if not, I apologize, and you can certainly reach out to us after this webinar. Someone said, should our baseline data be from the 2018-2019 school year or the 2019-2020 school year? Oh, I think Jennifer's responding to that, so I'll let her respond.
I was just typing it, but I can respond verbally as well. I was going to say that will probably vary by site. In some cases, you had baseline data included in your application. In some cases, you needed the grant funds in order to be able to collect the data. Just let us know which year is baseline. It'll vary by site.
Right. I don't know that I see any more. Let's see. I hope I've responded. If not, again, I apologize. I'm not seeing any more. Let me go to new. I don't think so.
There are a number of questions about how soon the video and PowerPoint will be available for folks. It will take a day or two, I think, to get the video saved and finalized and ready to post. But Carlette will send the link as soon as it is ready. We'll get it up as soon as we can.
Yeah. So that being said, and I don't see any other questions, and Jennifer, you can correct me if you see anything that I didn't address. But if we didn't, again, you can always reach out to your federal project officer. If for some reason someone sent me a message saying they were unfortunately missed part of this presentation and had a few questions, you can certainly reach out. And again, the presentation will be posted on the PBIS TA Center's website. So that being said, I just want to thank everyone again for participating. Again, this report is required, but the department knows and understands that we've all had some interruptions, and so this is going to look a little bit different than what we discussed in DC in terms of a report. It is intended to be a little more streamlined. It is intended to be a little more specific in terms of what's going on, and intended to give you some very specific instructions and directions in terms of letting us know what your circumstances are based on the COVID-19 disruption. We just want to make sure that you are aware of what we're looking for, what you should include, how you should submit, when you should submit. Someone did email me this morning and say, do we have to wait until the 15th? No, you certainly do not. The 15th is the due date. If you have completed your report prior to then, you simply email it off to both your federal project officer and that mailbox, so you don't have to wait until the 15th. That is simply the due date. And again, it's not going to be in G5, so don't go in G5 looking for the report. If you are familiar with that e-reporting system, you will not find it there because we are not going to use G5. We want you to be able to use the reporting form, email it to us, and without a lot of technical issues or interruptions. We realize that it's coming up pretty quickly. You have a little less than a month, but again, hopefully you've thought through some of what you need to do and what your plans are in terms of moving forward, and you can articulate that pretty quickly and get it to us. If you need assistance, if you need some additional clarity, don't hesitate to reach out. It is an important report and you are required to submit. So that being said, I want to thank you all again. I want to thank Jennifer and Nicole for assisting, and everyone at the PBIS TA Center for pulling this together. And again, thank you all for your patience. I know this webinar was originally scheduled for March and we had to postpone it, but hopefully you've gotten some information that's going to be useful and that'll help you get this report completed and out to us in a timely manner. So that being said, we're going to log off, and everyone have a great week.
Okay.